I remember the way my grandfather held my hand when I was 10 years old, his calloused palm warm against mine, and said something I would not understand for nearly 2 decades. Some things in life are not fair, but that does not mean you deserve any less. Back then I nodded, not grasping the weight behind those words. Now, sitting in a lawyer's office with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, watching my parents and my sister Madison shift uncomfortably in their seats, I finally understood what Grandpa Frank had known all along. Before I tell you what happened in that lawyer's office, I need to ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city in the comments below. If you have ever felt like the second choice in your own family, hit that like button because you are not alone in this. And subscribe because what my grandparents did, let me just say they were playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. Now, let me take you back to where this all started, to a childhood that taught me the difference between being born into a family and being loved by one. I was born in Portland, Oregon, on a rainy October morning that my mother says lasted 3 days. My father, Robert, worked as an accountant for a mid-sized firm downtown. My mother, Susan, spent her days as a nurse at the community hospital, coming home smelling of antiseptic and exhaustion. For the first 5 years of my life, I was their only child, and I remember fragments of that time like scattered photographs. Saturday afternoons at the park, where Dad pushed me on the swings until my stomach hurt from laughing. Mom reading bedtime stories with different voices for each character. Those memories feel like they belong to someone else's childhood now. Everything shifted when Madison arrived. I was 5 years old when they brought her home from the hospital, this tiny thing wrapped in a pink blanket. I remember being allowed to hold her for the first time, sitting very still on the couch, while Mom hovered nearby. "Be careful, she is precious." Mom had said, her voice carrying a tenderness I had never quite heard directed at me. I thought I just needed to be a good big brother. I thought the attention would balance out eventually. I was wrong on both counts. The first real sign came on my 8th birthday. For 6 months I had talked about nothing but a red bicycle I had seen at the sporting goods store. It had chrome handlebars and a bell that made a sound like a tiny gong. I drew pictures of it. I circled it in the catalog. I left hints so obvious that even our golden retriever probably knew what I wanted. On my birthday morning, I ran downstairs expecting to see that bike. Instead, I found a hardcover book about astronomy and a card that read, "Books are more important than toys. Build your mind, son." I tried to hide my disappointment. I thanked them. I told myself they were right about books being valuable. Then 3 months later, Madison turned 3 years old. I watched my parents wheel out a dollhouse the size of a small car, complete with working lights and tiny furniture. The price tag had accidentally been left on the bottom. $800. When I asked why Madison got something so expensive when they said toys were not important, my mother put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Your sister is younger, Peter. She needs more attention right now. You understand. Do not you?" I said I understood. But I did not. I was 8 years old, and I was learning that love in our house came with conditions I could not quite figure out how to meet. High school brought its own lessons in invisibility. I threw myself into academics and athletics, thinking maybe achievement would earn me what Madison seemed to get by simply existing. I made honor roll every semester. I ran track, and by junior year I was captain of the team with a grade point average of 3.8. I trained every morning before school, running loops around the neighborhood while the sky was still dark. I thought my parents would eventually notice. They did not. Not once did they come to watch me compete. Not during the regular season meets, not during districts, not even when I qualified for the state championship my senior year. The excuse was always the same. "We have to take care of Madison. She is still young." Madison was 13 years old at that point, perfectly capable of staying home alone for a few hours. But somehow she always needed them more than I did. I remember standing on that track at the state championship, lungs burning, legs shaking, crossing the finish line in first place. I looked up at the stands, scanning the crowd for my parents' faces. Their seats were empty. I accepted my gold medal with a smile that felt like it might crack my face. When I got home that night, they were watching a movie with Madison. I showed them the medal. "That is nice, honey," Mom said, barely looking away from the screen. Then she passed the popcorn to Madison. College was when the favoritism became impossible to ignore. I got accepted to State University with a partial scholarship, that covered about 60% of tuition. When I told my parents excited because I had worked so hard for that scholarship, they sat me down for a serious conversation. Peter, Dad said, "We are proud of you, but we cannot afford to cover the rest. You will need to work part-time to pay for what the scholarship does not cover. We just do not have the money." So I worked. I got a job as a barista at a coffee shop near campus, waking up at 4:30 in the morning to open. I tutored students in math and science on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I worked weekend shifts at a warehouse loading boxes until my back ached. I studied between shifts. I survived on instant noodles and whatever free food I could get from the coffee shop. I told myself this was building character. I told myself I was becoming independent. I told myself it was fine that I was doing this alone. 5 years later, Madison enrolled in college. She chose a private university that cost $45,000 per year. I found out because she called me excited about her acceptance. I congratulated her then, carefully asked how she was planning to pay for it. "Oh, Mom and Dad are covering it," she said, as if that were the most natural thing in the world. "The whole thing. I do not have to worry about money at all." I called my father that night. My hands were shaking as I dialed. I asked him how they could afford Madison's tuition when they could not help me 5 years earlier. There was a long pause. Then he said, "Your sister needs our support, Peter. You have always been strong. You can handle yourself. She needs us more." That was when I learned that need and love were somehow intertwined in my parents' minds, and I had committed the unforgivable sin of being self-sufficient. I had worked too hard, achieved too much, asked for too little. I had made it easy for them to forget about me. But through all of this, I had Grandpa Frank and Grandma Dorothy. They lived in a small house on the outskirts of Portland, a 15-minute drive that felt like entering a different world. Grandpa Frank was a retired carpenter with hands that could build anything, and a laugh that sounded like rolling thunder. He smelled like pipe tobacco and pine wood. Grandma Dorothy had been an elementary school teacher for 40 years. She moved through her kitchen like a conductor leading an orchestra, and her voice was as smooth as honey. Every weekend that I could manage, I drove to their house. While my parents barely noticed my absence, my grandparents made space for me in ways that felt like oxygen after being underwater. Grandpa Frank taught me woodworking in his garage, showing me how to measure twice and cut once, how to feel the grain of wood beneath my fingers, how to create something solid and real from raw materials. Grandma Dorothy taught me to bake apple pies, insisting that any man who could not feed himself was only half prepared for life. She told me stories about her students, about the troubled kids who turned out fine and the golden children who peaked early. I think now that she was trying to tell me something. They came to every single track meet my parents missed. Every single one. I would look up at the stands and see them there. Grandpa in his flannel jacket, Grandma with her thermos of coffee. They cheered for me like I was competing in the Olympics. When I won that state championship, they took me out to dinner at a steakhouse and made the waiter take a dozen photos of me with my medal. They got prints made and put them in frames all over their house. One summer evening when I was 16, I sat with Grandpa Frank on his porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple. I had just found out that my parents were taking Madison on a week-long trip to California, but told me I needed to stay home and work my summer job. I tried to act like it was fine, but Grandpa knew me too well. He handed me a glass of lemonade and sat down beside me in the old rocking chair that creaked with every movement. "Grandpa," I said, "why do Mom and Dad not love me like they love Madison?" He was quiet for a long time. So long I thought maybe he had not heard me. Then he set down his glass and turned to look at me directly. "Son, your parents, they have their own demons, their own reasons for the choices they make. But that does not define your worth. That does not make you less than." He put his hand on my shoulder, heavy and warm. "Your grandmother and I, we see you. We see everything you are and everything you are going to become. Do not you ever forget that." Then he said the words that would echo through my life. "Some things in life are not fair, but that does not mean you deserve any less. Remember this, Peter. Blood does not always mean family, and family does not always mean love. But I promise you, you will always have us." I did not fully understand what he meant then, but I felt safer, like someone had finally seen me standing there waving, trying to be noticed. My grandparents were my proof that I was worth loving. They were the only ones who made me feel like I mattered. I was 27 years old when the call came. I was living in Seattle by then, working as a project manager for a tech company. I had built a decent life for myself. I had an apartment with a view of the water friends I met for drinks on Fridays, a career that was going somewhere. I had not spoken to my parents in about 3 months, and Madison and I texted maybe twice a year. I had made peace with being the forgotten son, or so I thought. It was a Tuesday night in October, raining the way Seattle does, when my phone rang. Dad's name appeared on the screen. We had not talked since my birthday 6 months earlier, when he sent a text message that said, "Happy birthday, sport." I almost did not answer. Something made me pick up. Peter, his voice was strange, tight. "It is your grandmother. She had a stroke. She did not make it." The words hit me like a physical blow. I could not breathe. I could not speak. I heard him say more things, about hospitals and times and funeral arrangements. But all I could think about was Grandma Dorothy, her hands covered in flour, smiling at me across her kitchen counter. Gone. Just gone. 3 weeks later, I got another call. Grandpa Frank had died of heart failure. The doctor said it was a heart attack, but I knew better. His heart broke when Grandma died. They had been married for 52 years. He could not exist without her. I drove back to Portland for the funeral. It rained that day too, a cold November rain that soaked through my black suit. I stood by their side-by-side graves, and I could not cry. I felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped out my insides and left just a shell standing there. My parents and Madison stood several feet away, talking quietly with relatives I barely knew. I was alone, even surrounded by people. I thought about every Saturday in that garage, every pie crust lesson, every track meet they attended. The only people who had ever really loved me were now 6 feet underground. A week after the funeral, my father called me. "We need you to come home, Peter. We have to discuss your grandparents' estate." There was something in his voice I could not identify, something that made my stomach tighten with unease. I drove back to Portland the following weekend, pulling up to my parents' house in the late afternoon. Madison was already there, sitting in the living room like she owned the place. She had a glass of wine in her hand and greeted me with a small wave. Mom and Dad sat across from her, their faces arranged in expressions I could not quite read, serious, but something else underneath. I sat down in the armchair that had always been considered mine back when I lived there, back when I was part of this family. Peter, Dad began clearing his throat. "Your grandparents left behind quite a bit. The house saving some investments they made over the years. After everything is calculated, we are looking at about $1.2 million total." I was stunned. I knew my grandparents were comfortable, but I had no idea they had accumulated that much. They lived so simply. That little house with the creaky floors, Grandpa's ancient truck, Grandma's coupons for groceries. They never acted like people with money. "They named me as the executor of the estate," Dad continued, "so I am responsible for distributing everything according to the will." "Did they leave a will?" I asked. My throat felt dry. "Yes," Mom said, "but it is complicated." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Complicated how Dad pulled out a document. "The will divides things 3 ways. 30% comes to me. The remaining 70% goes to the grandchildren." I did quick math in my head. 70% of 1.2 million was $840,000. Split between Madison and me, that would be $420,000 each. That was life-changing money. That could pay off my student loans, give me a down payment on a house, let me breathe for the first time in years. "So Madison and I each get 35%, I said, wanting to confirm. My father did not meet my eyes. He looked down at the papers in his hands. "Actually," he said slowly, "the will states that the grandchildren's portion should be divided fairly." I stared at him. Fairly. What does that mean? Fairly would be splitting it evenly between the two of us. Madison spoke up for the first time. "It means we look at who needs it more, Peter." Something cold slithered down my spine. "What are you talking about?" Dad shifted in his seat. "Peter, your sister is in a difficult financial situation. She has student loans of about $100,000. She wants to start her own bakery business and needs capital. You, on the other hand, have a good job. You are doing well. You are financially stable. I could not believe what I was hearing. So what are you saying? We think it is fair. Mom jumped in. If Madison receives the majority of the grandchildren's share, you do not need it as much as she does. How much is majority? My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Distant. There was a pause. Then Dad said, "We are thinking Madison gets 60% of the grandchildren's portion. You get 10%. I did the math instantly. 60% would be $504,000 for Madison. 10% would be $84,000 for me. I sat there, unable to process what they were telling me. Wait, I said. You want to give her 6 times more than me? Peter, listen, Dad started. I stood up. This is what Grandma and Grandpa wanted. They wanted Madison to get 6 times more than me. The will gives us flexibility, Dad said. It says to distribute fairly based on need. We are interpreting what fair means. Interpreting, I repeated. You are interpreting their wishes to mean giving almost everything to Madison. Stop being selfish, Madison said, setting down her wine glass. I actually need this money. You have your fancy job in Seattle. I am trying to start a business. Something inside me snapped. Selfish, I turned to her. I worked 3 jobs through college while Mom and Dad paid every single penny for you. I lived on ramen noodles and 4 hours of sleep. You had everything handed to you, and I am selfish, Peter. That is enough, Mom said sharply. Do not bring up the past. The past. This is exactly about the past. This is about every single time you chose her over me. This is about every birthday, every achievement, every moment I was invisible while she was the center of your universe. Dad stood up. We are trying to do what is fair here, I laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. Fair, you do not know the meaning of that word. You have never known it. I looked around the living room, really looked at it. The walls were covered with photos. Madison's graduation, Madison's birthdays, Madison on vacation. I scanned every frame, every surface. There was not a single photo of me, not one. I had been erased from this family long before I left for college. Did Grandma and Grandpa actually write that the money should go mostly to Madison, I asked? Did they put her name specifically in the will? My father said nothing. The silence was deafening. Answer me, I demanded. The will, he finally said, is complicated. It gives us discretion to determine fair distribution based on need. I want to see it. I want to see the actual will, not your interpretation. The real document. We are your parents, Mom said. You need to trust us. Trust you, I felt something break inside me. Something that had been cracking for years finally shattered completely. I stopped trusting you when I was 8 years old and you told me I did not deserve a bicycle, but Madison deserved an $800 dollhouse. I stopped trusting you when you never came to a single one of my track meets. I stopped trusting you when you paid for her entire college education but told me to work 3 jobs to afford mine. The room went silent. Madison looked uncomfortable for the first time. Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. Dad just stared at his shoes. I am going to ask you one more time, I said, my voice steady despite the rage coursing through me. Did Grandma and Grandpa specifically write that Madison should get more than me? Yes or no? No one answered. And that was all the answer I needed. I walked out of that house and did not look back. I drove back to Seattle that night, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. The rain pounded against my windshield, and I could barely see the road through the water and my own blurred vision. But somewhere between Portland and Seattle, something shifted. I heard Grandpa Frank's voice in my head, as clear as if he were sitting in the passenger seat. You are strong. You can handle yourself. I was not going to let them do this. I was not going to let my parents rewrite my grandparents' wishes to favor Madison one more time. The next morning, I called in sick to work and started searching for estate lawyers in Portland. I needed someone good, someone who could not be intimidated by my parents. After several calls, I found Thomas Brennan, 50 years old, with 3 decades of experience in estate law and a reputation for being relentlessly ethical. I drove back to Portland 2 days later and met with Thomas in his office. It was a small firm, just him and 2 paralegals, but his walls were covered with certificates and commendations. I sat across from him and told him everything. The childhood favoritism, the college money, the funeral. The meeting where my parents tried to give Madison 6 times my inheritance. Thomas listened without interrupting, taking notes occasionally. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and folded his hands. Peter, this happens more often than you would think. Family members who are named as executors try to manipulate estate distributions to favor certain beneficiaries. It is illegal, but people try it anyway. Can they actually do this? I asked. Can they legally just decide to give Madison most of the money? Absolutely not, Thomas said firmly. Not if the will specifies a different distribution, and that is what we need to find out. As a beneficiary, you have the legal right to see the actual will. Your parents cannot keep it from you. They refused to show it to me, I said. Then we will get it through the court, Thomas replied. I will file a request with the probate court today. They will be required to produce the will within 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks felt like 2 years. I could not sleep. I could not focus at work. I kept imagining my grandparents thinking they had left me something meaningful, only to have my parents steal it away. Finally, Thomas called. The will had been delivered to his office. I drove down immediately. We sat in his conference room, and Thomas spread the document across the table. It was 12 pages long, typed in legal language that was hard to parse. But Thomas walked me through it, translating the legalese into plain English, and what we found made my hands shake. The will was crystal clear. 30% of the estate went to Robert, my father. 70% went to the grandchildren. But there was a special provision, 2 full pages long, that specified exactly how the grandchildren's share should be distributed. 50% of the total estate goes directly to Peter Robert Thompson, to be distributed to him immediately upon probate, with no conditions or restrictions. That was $420,000. For me, specifically for me, 20% of the total estate goes to Madison Elizabeth Thompson to be held in trust until she reaches age 35. Funds may be released earlier, only for approved educational expenses or verified business investments subject to trustee approval. That was $240,000, but Madison could not touch most of it until she was 35, and even then only for specific purposes. The remaining 30%, $240,000, shall be placed in a charitable trust in Peter's name, to be directed to causes of his choosing. I stared at the words. I read them 3 times. My grandparents had left me more than half of their entire estate. They had left Madison money too, but with restrictions, and they had trusted me with a huge charitable fund to use as I saw fit. This was not what my parents had told me at all. This was the exact opposite. But there was more. Thomas pointed to the next section titled Statement of Intent. This was where my grandparents explained their reasoning, and reading it I felt tears start to run down my face. We leave this distribution because we have witnessed throughout the years the unfair treatment our grandson Peter has endured from his parents. Peter has shown resilience, independence, and strength of character, despite receiving less love and financial support from Robert and Susan. He has worked for everything he has achieved, while Madison has been given every advantage without having to earn it. This is not Madison's fault. She is a product of her upbringing. But we cannot, in good conscience, perpetuate this inequality. We hope this distribution will finally give Peter what he has always deserved: recognition, support, and validation that he matters. To Robert and Susan, if you are reading this, know that we love you, but we could not stand by and watch Peter be forgotten one more time. This is not a punishment. This is justice. I could not read any more. I put my head in my hands and wept. They had seen me. They had seen everything. Every track meet my parents missed. Every birthday that was overlooked. Every time I was made to feel less than. And they had done something about it. Even after death, they were still protecting me, still fighting for me, still loving me. Thomas gave me a moment to compose myself, then slid another envelope across the table. This was attached to the will, he said quietly. It is addressed to you personally. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a letter in my grandfather's handwriting, the loops and slants I would recognize anywhere. I started to read, and I had to stop multiple times to catch my breath. Dear Peter, my boy, if you are reading this, your grandmother and I are gone. I am so sorry we cannot be there anymore to watch you become the man we always knew you would be. But I want you to know something, and I need you to really hear this. We saw you. Every track meet, every achievement, every moment you felt invisible to your parents, we saw you. We saw how hard you worked. We saw how you never complained, how you built yourself up when no one else would help you. We saw your strength and it made us so proud. Your father is our son, and we love him, but he and Susan made mistakes. They favored Madison, and it was not fair to you. We tried to talk to them about it over the years, but they could not see what they were doing. So, we did what we could. This money is not just inheritance. This is our way of telling you that you matter. You always mattered. You were never forgotten, not by us. Do not let your parents guilt you into giving this up. This is yours. This is what you deserve. You are going to do great things, Peter. You already have. We are so proud of you. We always were right from the start. Love, Grandpa Frank and Grandma Dorothy. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. Thomas waited patiently. When I finally looked up, I said, "What do we do now?" Now Thomas said, "We confront your parents, and we make sure your grandparents' wishes are honored exactly as they intended." We scheduled a meeting at Thomas's office for the following week. Thomas sent a formal letter to my parents requiring their attendance. When they arrived, Madison was with them. They looked confused and defensive. Thomas and I were already seated at the conference table. Thomas did not waste time with pleasantries. He placed the will in the center of the table. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, you attempted to defraud your son of his rightful inheritance. That is a serious legal matter." My father's face went pale. "We were not," he started. "We were just trying to be fair." Fair Thomas cut him off. "You told Peter he would receive 10% of the grandchildren's share. The will clearly states he should receive 50% of the entire estate. That is not a small discrepancy. That is attempted theft. My mother looked like she might be sick. How did you get the will?" "Peter is a beneficiary," Thomas said coldly. "He has every legal right to see it. You should have shown it to him from the start. Your failure to do so, combined with your misrepresentation of its contents, constitutes executor misconduct." I spoke for the first time. Grandma and Grandpa knew. They knew everything you did to me, everything you did not do. And they made sure I would finally be treated fairly, even if you would not do it yourselves. Madison had been silent, staring at the table. She looked genuinely shocked. I do not think my parents had told her the truth either. Dad tried one more time. "Son, we can work this out. We can come to an agreement." "No," I said firmly. "We cannot. The will is clear. I am taking what is mine, what Grandma and Grandpa wanted me to have." Thomas leaned forward. "And if you attempt to contest this will or interfere with the distribution, I will file a formal complaint with the probate court for executor misconduct. That carries serious consequences, including potential criminal charges for fraud." My parents knew they were beaten. The evidence was too clear. The will was too specific. They had gambled on me, not checking on me being too passive to fight back. They had been wrong. I looked at the three of them one last time. "You had my whole life to treat me fairly. You chose not to. Now it is too late to fix that. I am done." I stood up and walked out of that conference room. Thomas followed, and we completed the paperwork to remove my father as executor and appoint Thomas in his place. Within 3 months, I had received my full inheritance. 6 months after that meeting, I was standing in my new house in Seattle. It was not huge, just a small 3-bedroom craftsman with a yard and a view of the mountains in the distance. I had used part of my inheritance for the down payment. The rest I had invested, carefully paid off my remaining student loans, and set aside the charitable trust, just as my grandparents intended. I named the charitable fund the Frank and Dorothy Thompson Scholarship. Every year it provides full scholarships to 3 students from difficult family situations. Kids who are working multiple jobs. Kids who feel invisible in their own homes. Kids who need someone to see them and tell them they matter. I review the applications myself, and every time I approve a scholarship, I think about Grandpa teaching me to measure twice and cut once. I think about Grandma letting me lick the spoon when we made pie filling. I started seeing a therapist, too. It was not easy talking about everything, admitting how much the favoritism hurt, working through the anger and the grief and the feeling of never being enough. But slowly, I started to heal. I learned that my parents' inability to love me properly was not my fault. It was never my fault. I learned that I could build my own family from friends and people who actually saw me and valued me. I have not spoken to my parents or Madison since that day in the lawyer's office. They sent a few emails at first, trying to explain, trying to justify their actions. I deleted them without reading past the first line. Some people think I should forgive them, that family is family. But I realize that forgiveness does not mean giving people continued access to hurt you. And family should be the people who show up for you, not the people who share your DNA. Madison reached out once about a year ago. She sent a long message saying she did not know the full story, that our parents had lied to her too. She said she was sorry for how I was treated. I appreciated the gesture, but I did not respond. Too much had happened. Too many years of being second place. An apology could not undo that. I keep a photo of my grandparents on my mantle. It is from their 40th wedding anniversary, both of them smiling at the camera, Grandpa's arm around Grandma's shoulders. Sometimes I stand in front of it and just talk to them. I tell them about my day. I tell them about the scholarship recipients. I tell them thank you. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for making sure I knew I mattered. Thank you for loving me when no one else would. The truth is, I do not hate my parents. Hate requires too much energy, too much ongoing connection. I just feel nothing toward them now. They are strangers who I used to live with, and I am okay with that. I am better than okay. I am free. I learned something through all of this. You cannot make people see your value if they are determined to overlook it. You cannot earn love from people who have decided you are not worth it. But you can choose to walk away. You can choose to build a life with people who celebrate you instead of tolerating you. You can choose to honor the people who actually loved you even after they are gone. My grandparents gave me more than money. They gave me validation. They gave me proof that I was not crazy, that the favoritism was real and wrong. They gave me permission to stop trying to earn something I should have been given freely. They gave me freedom. Now, as I sit here in my home that I own, working a job I am good at, surrounded by friends who actually care about me, I realize something. I spent so much of my life trying to be good enough for my parents, trying to achieve enough, work hard enough, be invisible enough or visible enough, whatever seemed to be required in the moment. And none of it worked, because it was never about me. It was about them and their choices and whatever broken thing inside them that made them unable to love both their children equally. But Grandpa and Grandma, they loved me without conditions. They loved me when I won and when I lost. They loved me when I succeeded and when I struggled. They loved me for existing, not for performing. And that love, even though they are gone, is what saved me. So let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you were not enough for your family? Like no matter what you did, someone else was always the favorite? Drop a comment and tell me your story. You are not alone in this. Hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe, because I share more stories about overcoming family dysfunction and finding your own path. And share this video with someone who needs to hear that they matter, even if their family never made them feel that way. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps you understand that your worth is not determined by people who cannot see it. You deserve better. You always did. Take care of yourselves out there.